I mean, if we understand that if the central philosophical obsession of the medieval period and scholastic period was to reconcile the sort of inheritance of Greek philosophy, both in its Platonist and Aristotelian forms, with theological insight, then modern philosophy sort of carries this or radicalizes this in the attempt to sort of purify the concept and arrive at sort of a secure foundation of knowledge, right? Which leads to these crazy variations in systematic philosophy and in German idealism in particular. I would say that's a good question, actually. I mean, it's difficult because precisely the idea of the abyss there is, you're right, it's about the failure of achieving a condition or securing a condition, a sufficient condition or a sufficient reason to make the deduction work. But, and, he cheats, Kant cheats. The real abyss, however, we want to localize where it is actually the imagination. Um, so if we want to localize its precise location, it's the transcendental imagination. Kant has to cheat because in order to secure the commensurability between sensibility and the understanding, between the categories and the empirical, the data of the senses, he introduces this quote unquote third faculty, which at the end is nothing but the understanding functioning as a surrogate in intuition itself already, without which intuition would prove to be not only formless, right, but there could be no commensurability between the categories on the one hand and the forms of space and time, the forms of intuition. And we'll see exactly how he cheats precisely in this point. There's a series of sort of displacements that occur between the first and the second edition of the transcendental deduction, the A and B editions of the transcendental deduction. And of course, much of this, I heard many of you express an interest or express that some of your work relates to this concept, which of course is at the core of especially the second edition of the transcendental deduction, which is the unity of apperception, right? The transcendental unity of apperception, which is the highest, the most sort of glorified concept, the most important concept in Kant's theory of synthesis. In other words, in Kant's account of how it is that the faculties yield in their harmonious collaboration with each other, something like a cognition, a kenes, right? Like a representation of the world, an objective representation of the world. And this is what Kant will ultimately not be able to tell us, right? Because he's cheating. Again, he is reifying contingent theoretical paradigms and a contingent understanding of space as an invariant transcendental structure. So the transcendental deduction will be precisely an attempt to sort out this mess, to tell us how it is that synthesis occurs, and to tell us how it is that intuition, sensibility itself, is already structured by precisely the labor of this undercover agent of the understanding called the transcendental imagination. Yes, and there's I mean, of course, poor Kant has been a punching bag ever since Kant wrote, right? So he has been critiqued for a variety of reasons, and there's really no end to, at every turn of the way, you can find something that Kant can be charged for, which I think is both interesting in its own right, just because you can, take this very far, but it's also highly redundant. The Bergsonist critique of Kant overlaps tremendously with Hegel's critique of Kant and Heidegger's critique of Kant and Deleuze's critique of Kant and everyone's critique of Kant. Everybody grabs Kant as guilty of basically being a metaphysician and a theological metaphysician undercover. And of course, they're right. What's interesting, really, and the reason why we still read Kant with such sort of rigor and passion is because despite this sort of betrayal or this failure, whatever you want, right? There seems to be something that he's looking after that philosophy cannot avoid if in fact it can survive at all. And we'll get to that precisely. I mean, the question of the imagination is really where all comes crumbling into pieces, I think.